All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining our bi-weekly webinar Wednesday. I'm Stephen Phelps. I'm the marketing manager for Acumen. I'm here with my account management team along with Mark and Nicole from Net at Work. As COVID-19 changes the way companies are doing business, HR is playing a key role. For today's webinar, we'll demonstrate how to leverage today's human capital management, HCM systems, to provide an integrated, all-in-one software solution for automating and managing your organization's core workforce administration across all areas. Please note this webinar is in listen-only mode and should be around 1 hour long. If we have some time near the end of the presentation, we will also answer a few questions. So please use the chat option during that time, or you can always reach out to your account manager for more information. And with that being said, I will now pass it on to Mark to begin the presentation.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Stephen, and welcome all. My name is Mark Boudelier. I'm the Senior Solutions Engineer at Net at Work in our Employer Solutions practice, and I've been working with human capital management systems for over 30 years. Before that, I actually developed an HRIS for my employer, Human Resource Information Systems. And for over 20 years now, I've been involved in selling Sage and now Criterion products. So hopefully in today's session, part of what my goal in this session is to really give you some ideas in terms of HCM systems and, again, how we can best utilize those given the particular conditions that we're in today. Net at Work is an entire ecosystem. Like I said, I'm from the Employer Solutions practice, but our ecosystem starts with our 200+ business technology architects and consultants. We use state-of-the-art technology, all designed to build technical platforms to allow you to unleash the potential of your organization. Well, one of the things we're really proud to be able to do is to partner with folks like Acumen to really be your trusted advisor. I know for years you've no doubt, as you've worked with Acumen, know them as ERP and General Ledger and other systems. But now that they've partnered with us, they have really, what we've done is opened up a wide area of experience that we have with HR technologies, and together we would like the partner to be your trusted advisor in this area. So as the name of our presentation today implies, HCM, or Human Capital Management Systems, are really in the eye of the storm in the response to COVID-19. Whether you think about paid family medical leave, employee retention credit, the CARES information, paid family medical, Families First paid medical leave, even the Small Business Administration loans that are available. There's a vast amount of resources that are going to be available to employers both now and since the beginning of the month and off into the future. And really in the center of that is organizations' HR and payroll systems. And I think what we've discovered anyway, or what we've found in talking to folks, is that this pandemic and the response to it has really exposed for organizations some of the shortcomings of their current systems. And it's some of those that I'd like to explore with you today and have you be thinking about your own system and how your HR and payroll system, both the people and the resources, have been able to respond to the pandemic response. One of the things I think is, for those of you on the call, I mean, one of the first things is to consider is why are we talking about a new system now? And I want to share with you 4 reasons why this is really the time to be thinking about either adding to, modifying, or changing your HR and payroll system. First off, an HCMS, or Human Capital Management System, is always going to help you lower costs. And I want to show you that over, through the course of today's presentation. We'll see, I think, some practical ways that HCMS or HCMs can help to lower costs. It will allow you to understand, again, an HCM system will always allow you to understand your company's strengths and be able to unleash the power of your company to grow and thrive, especially given the economy that we're in today. So much of that, ultimately, the resource, the single most important resource for many organizations is that human resource, and the single most greatest capital investment is that investment in the human capital of an organization. So it's always a good, in some ways, it's always a good time to consider how to own the most effective HCM system. Additionally, and specifically where we are today, to be able to take advantage of the government programs that are out there and designed to preserve your workforce during this need, this particular response, you really need a system that's able to track your employees, track their leave, track their taxes, and other items. And an HCMS system will help keep you compliant with these new laws and changes in the wake of COVID-19. And certainly, when we're talking about systems and we're talking about the COVID-19 response, I mean, honestly, we're responding as employers and in the business community, we're responding on a daily basis and on a weekly basis. And I know it's hard to, with the focus on that, the necessary things to do every day, it's sometimes hard to think, to kind of lift our head up to the horizon a little bit and realize that there's going to be downstream impact in a number of ways where we're going to need a system to be able to report out, for example, employees that we paid, that we're going to need systems at the end of the quarter and at the end of the year that are going to accommodate the temporary changes, hopefully, temporary changes that we've made in terms of various earnings and the tax impact. So it's more than just a today thing. And systems are going to allow you to be able to respond to that. Practically speaking, for many organizations, this is a good time to think about the change. First off, we can focus on projects that maybe have been backburnered. Lots of organizations we talk to, from time to time, look at HR and payroll systems, look at how they're managing their employees and human capital, if you will, and other things impinge on that. Other business requirements sort of set that priority off to the side. Well, with those requirements minimized in terms of things like production, for example, this is a good time to focus on those projects that we know that we wanted to do, but that we've been putting off for a while. All of our implementations are always done via remote. So this idea of working from home, our cadre of consultants all work from home. They all work remotely with staff with our clients throughout the country. So this is a great time to be able to take advantage of that situation. And there's also generous financing available for these important investments. These are important projects both in the near term and then in the midterm. And fortunately, there is lots of financing, both through some of the specific COVID-19, some of the COVID-19 funds that are available, but also more generally, there are financing through folks like Acumen and ourselves at Net at Work, so that you can finance these projects and get going with them. I think probably the most important thing to consider is to be ready with a state-of-the-art system during the recovery period. As everybody says, we're going to get through this, and there are several kind of key areas, including employee and self-service and manager self-service, recruiting and onboarding. Think of the fact think of the fact that as your organization gears up, you're going to be re-onboarding those employees that you've either furloughed or have actually had to terminate, and now you're rehiring. Certainly the payroll process and sort of getting that back to normal, whatever that ends up being. And also being able to engage or re-engage your employees. And then finally, from a technical perspective, having a unified database for reporting, these all represent state-of-the-art in terms of HCM. And what it will do by considering this now and by starting to look at an alternative to what you're using today, it will really, again, position your company to unleash your growth and recovery when the crisis is over. This is a tool that you'll have in your toolbox to be able to respond more quickly and more effectively, perhaps, than your competitors. Well, I've been using HCMS for the last few minutes. That's somewhat of a jargon in our world, but you may know it as the Human Resource Management System, HRMS, or Human Resource Information System, Talent Management Systems. In your organization, it may be the HR department, or it may actually devolve, if you will, down into the payroll person. Whatever you call your system by any other name, it is that system that you use in your organization to really manage the employee life cycle. And when we look at the employee life cycle, we think about recruiting and onboarding. How do we manage paying employees? How do we manage benefits? How do we manage tracking time off? All the way through the employee's life cycle with us, through career development and promotion, ultimately retirement or perhaps termination. So if you think about this life cycle that an employee has with you, some organizations are going to put emphasis on some parts more than others. But if you have employees, which I presume everybody on the call is an employer, then you know that there are some of these basic things that have to take place either in a formal way or an informal way. But you have to track time for your employees. You have to pay your employees. You're doing some sort of evaluation of their performance to make decisions about who to keep and who to let go. And ultimately, in most cases, employees are garnering benefits, including retirement benefits. So all of these, even if you're not formal in or have a formalized process around each of these steps, you certainly are doing it in some form or fashion. All employers are to some extent. And as I'll talk about in a few more moments too, what this does, or what this management of this life cycle does, is it allows you to maximize your return on employee investment. So I think most of you on the call are of course, very familiar with the ROI, or return on investment. But when we're talking about the HCMS sphere, we're really talking about the return on employee investment, thinking about the investments that you're making in employees directly with those employees, and ultimately the management of that investment, if you will. What kind of return are you getting, and how can you measure that? And we'll come back to that as we go through today's session here. What an HCMS gives us is a single point of truth. So whether we're talking about the CEO or the CFO or supervisor or the benefit administrator or the recruiter in the organization, they're all looking at the same information about an employee. And that's very, very important for a whole variety of reasons in terms of understanding who your employees are. Thinking about if you're replacing an employee, well, what are those skills and KPIs that employee needs to have, or somebody in that position needs to have. The opposite of this, for example, are organizations where the data about employees is scattered in a whole bunch of places. It's in some supervisor's drawer on a piece of paper. It's in HR in a file. And when the Others need to access that information about employee skills, about longevity, about education, about employee history. It's not readily available. And HCMS allows us to have that single point of truth for reporting purposes. As organizations grow and mature, this life cycle really becomes more formalized, or these steps in the life cycle become more formalized. As organizations grow in complexity and over time, different aspects of this become more important. As I said, I mean, all organizations have things like tracking who worked, tracking how much we paid them, tracking who they are. Those are the basics that all organizations have. But as organizations grow over time, or as organizations through complexity, some of these other issues in terms of managing performance or benefit administration, ultimately learning management and compensation management, all of those things become more formalized and more important and become needs of organizations as they become more complex. When we at Net at Work look at our clients and prospects, we use this value chain assessment as part of that assessment as a tool. And what it tells us is, we ask our clients, and I would ask you yourself as you're looking at this, you know, where do you see yourself? Where do you see your organization? And where would you like to be? And it's interesting that a common measurement in the HR world is the number of employees, as opposed to sales or other kinds of production or other kinds of measurement. So for us, the number of employees is sort of that common way that we measure the size of an organization. And you could have an organization, and in my experience, I've worked with organizations that have thousands of employees, and yet they're really not much further advanced than that survival mode. On the other hand, you might have a very small, and I've worked with relatively speaking small organizations under 50 employees, for example, where they're really in that leader or innovator level, where they have very robust systems for a whole variety of reasons. So your organization, or organizations in general, can be, you know, they can be down in that startup and survival mode, or they can be an innovator. But typically organizations are sort of moving along the spectrum, if you will, towards being in a leadership role or an innovator role, if only because, and this is how the whole HR kind of ecosystem works, if you're an innovative organization, then that's information that gets out. You know, that gets out through websites like Glassdoor, for example, or Indeed, and skilled people want to come and work for your organization. If you have a leadership system, if you will, or you're an innovator in terms of the kinds of services that your HR and payroll department offers an organization. So that has an effect on your ability to recruit employees based on your reputation and the kinds of things that your employees are experiencing. Ultimately, I think this quote is really the essence of the real purpose of an HCMS. I mean, we've been talking obviously about, or I've been speaking the last few minutes about, things that are directly helping the organization, and sometimes that can get a little esoteric, if you will. You know, it's about measurements and statistics and complexity. Ultimately, what an HCM system should do, and what you can judge your own system by, is, does it make it easy for employees to fill out time cards, do an expense report, either sign up for training, or supervisors be able to assign training, to select, ways that you can improve the performance of an employee, be able to assess and measure that performance in some way, ultimately be able to set and measure goals. It's these practical activities that ultimately the HCMS should make possible for whether I'm an administrator, a supervisor, or an employee, to be able to do these more effectively so that I can concentrate on the critical job, or the critical part of my job, if you will, the part that's profit making for organizations, and not have to spend time trying to figure out some of the administrative stuff that is important. Each of these things are important items, but we don't want to spend a lot of time on them. With respect to selection considerations, if you're looking at a system, that fundamentally one of the first decisions organizations make, and obviously you've made this decision or are making it or considering this decision in terms of other systems that you're using, like your ERP systems, and that is whether to be on-premise or hosted, or a full cloud or software as a service. We at Net at Work actually support two options. One from our friends at Sage, who I'm sure folks on the call are familiar with, Sage HRMS. It's the leading, the premier on-premise solution these days in terms of a human capital management or an HRMS system. And then there are a number of cloud or SaaS solutions. We actually prefer one called Criterion. But that fundamental decision about cloud-based versus on-premise is one of the most important decisions that organizations will make. I want to share with you a little bit some of the differences between the two. If we look at cloud-based organization, or cloud-based solutions rather, some of the advantages. IT infrastructure is not needed. We don't need servers. All we need is a high-speed internet access. It's great for a distributed workforce. So if we have individuals who are working in different locations, or if we have individuals who are working in the field, a cloud-based solution, because it's based on internet access, is a great choice. Cloud-based solutions typically have automatic updates, and they have automated or automatic new feature rollouts. Criterion, the product that we like very much, has a 7-week cycle of every 7 weeks they're rolling out new features, new functionality. Think about the other web solutions that you use both in business but also in your personal life. You know, cloud-based solutions, it's very easy to be able to roll out and update and respond and be nimble when conditions require. It is an operating versus a capital expense. So cloud-based solutions are, you know, just like other operating expenses in terms of how it affects the balance sheet. Just like electricity or internet access itself, you know, rental and those other kinds of operating expenses. And typically, cloud-based solutions are sensitive to and can vary in cost based on the employee count. So again, we come back to that employee count and thinking about how, again, in terms of, in this case, how cloud-based solutions are priced. They're typically priced per employee per month. And so if your employee count varies one way or the other, then that can have an impact on the cost of a cloud-based solution, but it's very granular in terms of the number of employees. By contrast, an on-premise solution, frankly, gives you more control of the data. On-premise solutions, our solution uses SQL databases. Those databases are there and available. They are on our clients' servers. That means integration with other existing on-premise systems tends to be easier with on-premise solutions. It also means that typically customization, configuration, adding on third-party products, it's oftentimes easier to do that with an on-premise solution. You get to control when the updates take place. It is a capital versus an operating expense. So you really are able to say, okay, we're going to invest do this capital expense and then amortize that out over a few, whatever number of years, whatever the case may be. On-premise solutions are usually sold within a range of employees, so you're not having to go back to update the system each time you perhaps hire a group of employees for a project. One system is not necessarily better than the other. I have a slight preference toward cloud-based solutions, but on-premise solutions have important and valuable ways that for certain organizations, it really makes sense. So that's one of the things that you really want to think about in your organization. Do we want to move into the cloud with this, or is this something that we want to keep on-premise? This slide just is a quick, and I'm not going to go through all the details of it, but I know many folks on this call coming from a financial background, you're probably better aware than I am of the differences between capital expenses versus operating expenses. But I think this is a good slide, and again, we're going to provide you with copies of the slide decks, but it's a good slide to emphasize the differences specifically within software purchases why there is increasingly a preference for cloud-based systems because of the fact that it's an operating expense and the investments are very different, and the things like the deployment and so forth. Again, I won't go through everything in this slide, but there are some really interesting things that we have to say about that. Kind of following along the same lines, one of the sort of the ancillary questions, whether you're on-premise or in the cloud, is payroll. Is payroll with HR and payroll together, or is payroll part of general ledger or an ERP solution? That's a common question that folks need to think about. If we're looking at something like Sage 300, there's a lot of frankly, there's a lot of employee information that's in there, and oftentimes folks feel like, I need to have my payroll processed within or as part of my ERP system, because it's tied to things like job costing or cost centers. I just need those things closely aligned together. On the other hand, oftentimes with cloud solutions, and particularly cloud solutions, but both cloud and on-premise solutions, you can use various methods. With cloud solutions, we use what's called an API, and all an API is it is a simple, safe, secure way for data to be transferred between your app or my app and the other application. Real-time data transfer can take place through these APIs, and APIs are an important part of and the typical way that human capital cloud HCMSs are integrated with general ledger or other ERP. And in that case, the type of payroll information that we're typically passing is ultimately just general ledger kind of information. So again, it's a choice that you can make in terms of who controls who controls or who wants responsibility for payroll, and whether it resides with HR or resides with finance. Workforce mobility and access needs to be a really important consideration for you. I mentioned a moment ago about employee self-service, but I want to share or have you think about a couple things in terms of workforce mobility and access. Obviously, one of the things that comes under that is whether or not you, as I mentioned earlier, do you have a dispersed workforce? Do you have folks who are, field technicians of some sort? Are they out in the field, or are they outside of an office setting? Do you have employees who are scattered around in different locations or in different buildings, and don't have access to or aren't sitting in front of a computer or a workstation of some sort? So that's sort of one aspect of it in terms of your workforce and workforce mobility. The other aspect of it is of mobility to consider is it's generational in nature. Increasingly, as millennials come into management positions, and certainly millennials and Gen Z employees have grown up with digital, have grown up with remote access, live and die by what they can access on their mobile devices, whether it be a phone or an iPad or whatever that might be. And so for those employees, it's an important consideration that they be able to access their data. Let's face it, I mean, we're doing all sorts of things today, right now, whether it's ordering food, using, meals through our phone, whether it's ordering rides, through Uber. I mean, everybody today, all of us to a certain extent are sort of living and dying on our mobile devices, but particularly with respect to expectations that millennials and Gen Zs will have, Generation Zs, expectations that those digital natives will have coming to work for you. They will expect to be able to get their check stub on their phone. They will expect to be able to see what their schedule is on their phone. They will expect to be able to perhaps change demographic information. They're not going to want to sit down at a computer and do that, much less do it on paper. They're going to want to be able to do it on a device that's ready to hand. Some of the goals, I think, to sort of emphasize that is, one, to stop entering the same data in more than one solution. Eliminating duplicate data is so important and such a fundamental part of the human capital management system. Whether we can transfer that data or not, we want to be able to enter, again, have that single point of truth, that single place where we're entering that data, and if that data needs to go to a separate payroll, or that payroll is integrated directly with the HCMS, whether that information needs to go to timekeeping, or that timekeeping is integrated within the HCMS. We want to be able to enter the information once and not have to enter it in multiple locations. The ability to have improved processes without adding more employees. Historically, the ratio of HR and payroll employees continues to decline. The ratio of HR staff, for example, per so many hundred employees, or the number of employees that you have. So the idea is to be able to, one, improve the processes so that they're more effective, and do that without adding more employees, and thereby grow the business. Moving towards a paperless system, again, part and parcel of what we're talking about here, and it kind of even beyond paper systems, which is sort of, again, very much at the survival stage, if you think of that chart that we were looking at, but also moving out of multiple Excel spreadsheets or other kinds of reporting tools to a single database that becomes a single source for reporting, doesn't it? So some specific areas where HCMSs can make a difference in your organization. One of those, as I mentioned a couple of times, is being able to track the critical elements of regulatory compliance, whether that's OSHA tracking, immigration law, tracking skills and certifications, employee categories. If we're talking about overtime or paid leave or other Department of Labor compliance, the tool that you must have to really be effective with that is some sort of HCMS system, so that you can track all that information together, so that when ICE comes in, you can quickly access I-9 or green card or visa information. When you're getting ready to bid for a project, to be able to know what are the licenses and certifications and expertise that your current staff has, and what are those licenses and cert skills and expertise that you're going to have to go out into the marketplace and recruit for. And certainly OSHA kind of goes without saying, safety training, both from a reporting perspective, but also from a tracking perspective. The flip side of this, of course, is if you're not compliant, I like to say, and I believe that this is true, that labor is one of the areas that is most is one of the most regulated parts of our economy and parts of our lives as employees. Whether it's Affordable Care Act or OSHA or Fair Labor Standards Act around things like overtime, it is very costly to make a mistake. And oftentimes the mistake that employers are making is not necessarily willful violations. If we take things like the Affordable Care Act specifically, the penalties that employers have faced around the Affordable Care Act, by and large, have not been that they willfully ignored the requirements of the ACA. It's that they didn't have the documentation. And so that's why an HCMS, that's the role that it plays in terms of compliance, not only to guide you to make sure that you are compliant, but also to be able to document that you were compliant. And it's that documentation that will save the day for organizations if they had it and it's readily available, and they can show that they were in compliance. A second major area is benefit management. So thinking about benefits, things like reconciliation of vendor list bills or the ability to generate an employee census. If you're self-billed or you're self-insured, being able to generate reports for self-building, trend analysis about benefit plan adoption. Are you offering voluntary benefits that nobody's signing up for? Well, those are resources, time, and effort that you could spend somewhere else. So certainly anyone who has ever had to look at the bill for their benefits knows that benefit costs continue to increase. And there really doesn't seem to be any end in sight. And organizations that are able to lower their costs do that because they have the information that they have accurate information of whether it's a census of their employees and their employees' age, whether it's just being able to take the vendor list bills and quickly reconcile those to make sure that you're not being charged for employees who have left or charged for benefits that are no longer being provided. All of that sort of administration comes under the aegis of a human capital management system. Obviously, paid time off plans are so top of mind right now and are directly part of the COVID-19 response. Part of what we're going to see as employers, my prediction is, in terms of paid time off plans, there are a number of local and state paid time off requirements. If you're in states like Washington or Massachusetts or California, then you know already that there are requirements for paid time off. If you don't think there's going to be a national push for some sort of national paid time off, then you've really missed one of the messages that I think people are going to take out of their experience with their COVID-19 response. There's going to be a huge uptick in interest in that. And again, it's been growing by states and by localities. We're going to see that on the national level to have that discussion. And the other thing in terms of benefits that we often see organizations using HCMs for is tracking company assigned assets, equipment, cell phones, company vehicles, the broad spectrum of things that are equipment that are being assigned by organizations to their employees, uniforms, et cetera, and being able to manage that and make sure that, first off, where all that equipment is, and secondly, as employees come into your organization and leave your organization, that equipment doesn't leave with them in some form or fashion. Again, we've probably seen these statistics before, but benefits in terms of total employer costs for an employee's hour of wages. This is actually data from December of 2019 by region. And as you can see, there's a huge chunk of that that has to do with benefits. And sharp, smart employers are looking at those costs and how to be creative about those costs and get the most in terms of a return on the investment, in terms of employee engagement, employee goodwill, employee health in general. This is looking at the same information. This is actually from a couple of years ago now, but just a further breakdown, in this case by industries or industry areas, including leisure and hospitality and construction and others. But just a sense, again, looking at the total compensation and sort of making granular what constitutes that benefit information. So I thought that was interesting to see in terms of, again, things like retirement, paid leave, legally required benefits, employer payment of taxes, et cetera. Well, I've mentioned reporting in a couple of different ways. What I want to have you consider is that, again, I've emphasized before, that single point of truth for employee data. And that means that business decisions can be made by digging in and mining that data, just like organizations mine data about their clients. You probably know more about your clients and your clients' needs than you do about your employees. That's often the case. And so being able to go into that so-called big data, or being able to mine into that data to better understand your organization and your resources. Again, tracking information, reporting, pay modeling, forecasting, analysis, what kinds of, what's going on. Ultimately, the holy grail, if you will, of HR analysis is being able to do predictive analysis. What if we give everybody a raise? What will be the cost of that? And more importantly, what will be the impact of that? How will that lower our costs for replacing employees, for example? If we're having a high rate of turnover or higher rate of turnover, will increasing the pay for our employees, will that have an effect on that turnover? And things like seniority, licensing, training, reporting, tracking, all those things we've talked about in the last few minutes. Modern HCM systems allow us to get into that data in real time using dashboarding. If you think about what you're currently doing today in terms of your ERP and other systems, you have dashboards where there are the same equivalents in HCMS systems, where we can see things like, what's our turnover rate? What's our total employee count? You'd be amazed how many organizations don't honestly know how many people are working for them. What's the makeup of that? Tracking things like onboarding or other tasks, just tracking trends and being able to see in terms of hires and terminations. And one interesting statistic on this particular dashboard that I've mentioned before, and that's average age. Sometimes it's amazing organizations when they start to analyze and realize, oh my goodness, all our senior managers are over 60 years old. Well, what's going to happen to your organization in 5 years when they all start to retire? I mean, the exodus of baby boomers generally in organizations is certainly something that folks have seen and analyzed, but as individual organizations start to look at that and realize that expertise is going to go out the door, well, who's in the wings to take over, and who do we need to develop? And sometimes it comes as a shock to some organizations that they suddenly realize that all of their expertise is all 65 or 70 years old. Employee engagement, I've really talked about this in a number of different ways, but employee engagement is crucial in keeping and growing productive employees. It's finding and engaging employees. That's an investment. And how as an organization can we measure and maximize the return on that investment? What kinds of things, whether we're talking about training costs or recruiting and replacement costs, being able to appraise employees, budgeting and planning for the succession examples that I just made. That all has to do with engaging our employees, and how are we engaging our employees, and are we successful, and is it worth the investment in those employees? And there are lots of different ways of tracking that, but one of the ways you have to be able to do is be able to assess, well, what are my training costs, and what is the return on investment? If I invest in a mentoring plan, is that going? Do I see a corresponding reduction in recruiting and replacement costs, as an example? And to do that, you have to start with a system that has the data. One particular area that I think is of particular interest, and again, very much top of mind with changes that are taking place in response to COVID-19, and that's using tax credits. So when we look at tax credits, there are new hire tax credits, there are state and federal employer tax credits. But it's important to understand how eligibility is determined and managing that process within the HCMS. Practically speaking, probably the one that is most common and has been for many years through many administrations. This is not new by any stretch of the imagination, but it's become more important as we think about what we'll be doing in a few months or a few weeks, whatever the time frame may be. But as production in this country begins to increase, as unemployment decreases, and that's the work opportunity tax credit. The work opportunity tax credit is based on certain categories of employees. And there's a variety of those different categories, but employers who hire eligible employees and track that process, they can see a top line tax credit of up to $2,400 per employee. And these statistics from our partners show that, a typical organization, if you have 100 new hires or rehires, and that's specifically, again, thinking about where we may be in the next few months, then if those employees qualify, long-term unemployment, being on TANF, veterans, felons, there are all sorts of different areas or different categories of employees. Typically, for most organizations, about 15% of their new hires. So again, we've done some simple, easy math here. We're talking about top-line tax credits of $36,000 for an organization of this size. Your mileage may vary, as they say, but certainly it's worth taking a look at that. And part of the understanding of this is, in order to qualify for those work opportunity tax credits, you have to have a process and a system to be able to track who's eligible, how long have they been employed, what have they been paid for wages. There's lots of information, and it's exactly the kind of data that, one, we track in a system, and two, that has bottom line results for an organization in terms of tax credits. Well, as I said, and just to recap, why is this a good time to consider? Why have you spent the last 45 minutes? Lower costs and allow you to understand your human capital assets. Take advantage of those government programs today to preserve your workforce. Now is a good time to make a change, and it will set your organization to be ready for a recovery and to unleash the power of your organization to grow and to thrive. If you'd like to find out more about the HR and the HR and payroll responses to COVID, we at Net at Work have we are now and we've had for the last few weeks, a weekly webcast series where we bring in attorneys and other folks to talk about the very latest, and sometimes it's on a day-by-day basis. Sort of with that, we also publish a weekly bulletin for HR professionals. Again, we're trying to distill all the facts down to get the useful information and get rid of the speculation. So you are certainly welcome to sign up and sit in. Both of these are complimentary, of course. Talk to your Acumen account managers about that, and they can get you some details in terms of how to sign up and gain that information. If folks have questions, we're going to take a few questions. Just before we do that, I'd like to thank you all for sitting in on today's session. I hope you found some valuable information. Hope it's given you some ideas thinking about your own system and where you might want to be in the near future. And I'm also going to put up this contact slide, remind you in terms of how you can reach your Acumen account manager. But with that, I'm going to ask, Stephen, are there any questions that I can answer for the group?
Yeah, so right now we'll open up the chat options. So if you guys do have any questions, just type them in and we'll read them out loud and pass them on to Mark. We did have two questions that came in during the presentation. The first one said, what if I already have employee information in another system? Will I have to re-enter it into a new system?
It's a great question. No, it is. First off, there's some common data across systems. Obviously, you think of somebody's name and address, social security number, but in our implementations, we know that you have data. All organizations have data in some form. So as long as that data is in some sort of electronic format, then we will migrate that data into whatever system you decide to go with. Unfortunately, we can't get stuff off a paper form, but we certainly can get it out of Excel or Access or other kinds of databases or other systems that you might be using.
Thanks, Mark. The second one that came in, it says, what if my employees don't use computers at work? How can they access self-service?
That's a great question. It's a very common question that I hear. You know, folks are like, well, you know, my people are either on the shop floor or, you know, they're out doing work on the grounds or whatever the case might be. They don't have computers. Follow on to that is, oh, my employees don't have computers at home either. They're not going to be able to benefit by any of this stuff. And my response to that is always, do they have a phone? And if they have a phone, you know, it's probably an iPhone or it's some sort of phone that's running an Android operating system like a Galaxy. And as long as they have some device, then they can access through apps, through an application, they can access that information. So don't narrow your focus down and say, well, my employees are not sitting at a desk in front of a computer. They're not going to be interested in this information. Most folks now have some form of technology that they can get at that information.
Thanks, Mark. I'm just going to wait just a few more, maybe one more minute to see if any more questions come in, and then I'll pass it on to Paul, who is our managing partner, for some closing remarks. All right, we have actually one more that just came in. It says, what are some of the cost justifications of an HCMS?
Oh yes, it's funny. I do a whole separate webinar on cost justifications. But some of the things that and you can see this in the presentation today. But some of the things that you will want to measure is things like if you look at your current situation, what are you paying to hire employees? How often are your employees turning over? What are the costs associated with that? What are the costs associated with training and development for your employees? But if you start to think about some of those costs and quantify those, then both hard and soft costs, as you begin to quantify those costs, then you can begin to think about, okay, what if we could reduce those costs? What if we could reduce them by 10% or 20% or some number, and that will help you in terms of thinking about how to justify a system. It's something that we often do when, as you can imagine, when we're talking with folks, and I'm sure your Acumen account managers do as well, just in terms of thinking, you know, what is this going to save for the investment that I make? And there are real cost savings that you can quantify.
Appreciate that. So I think that's all the questions that came in. I'll pass it on to Paul now, if he wants to say a few words.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Firstly, Mark, thank you very much for delivering that impeccably delivered presentation. Obviously, it's very sobering information in the kind of current circumstances, but obviously, as clients, vendors, and you know, every real business comes to challenges with HR management, compliance, and the legal aspects that kind of relate to that. You know, we all find ourselves in very, very strange and unprecedented times. And quite frankly, we're now living in a world where, you know, we could do with as much advice and as much help as we can conceivably get. So first of all, thank you very much for that. And thank you very much, Stephen, for putting that together. As Mark kind of suggested, you know, we are providing a lot of these educational sessions as best we can with the time available to really provide as much information out there into the community as we possibly can. Other things that we have are free training courses on SACE 300. You know, as we are impacted by staff changes, there are a lot of kind of training needs that may be going unmeasured, and you know, people going untrained, and you know, typically accounting systems and other systems are not easy to use when you don't have any training. And then obviously HR has become a very hot topic. We had to decide as a business whether we were going to skill ourselves up for over the next 6 months, but obviously with everything that's going on in the world, we needed something far quicker and something that, you know, was able to hit the ground running, which is why our relationship with Net at Work has been fantastic. They have much more expertise in many areas, and really, you know, with Mark and his division, we're kind of able to hit the ground very quickly and be in a position to provide that advice, that compliance, and those solutions without any further delays. So please continue. We've got a series of webinars and training courses coming up over the next couple of weeks. As Mark mentioned, there are complimentary sessions as well from Net at Work, which is more detail on HR and compliance. So please feel free to stay in contact with your account managers. Please contact Stephen or the account management team if you have any special requests that we may not be fulfilling. You know, we're no different than everybody else. We're trying to get through this current situation in the world as best we can. We're trying to provide whatever we can, but that doesn't mean to say that, you know, we have a comprehensive list. So I guess that just leaves me to say thank you very much for everybody today, extending the time to us, and you know, please keep talking to us. And thank you once again, Mark. Thank you, Stephen. I think that was an exceptionally well delivered presentation. So thank you.